There is a number in professional football that has never been explained entirely by statistics. 4 Super Bowl championships, 4 Super Bowl MVPs, 3 league MVP awards, 35,000 passing yards, 273 touchdown passes. A quarterback rating that, for more than a decade, was the highest in the history of the NFL. The numbers are extraordinary. They are also, somehow, insufficient. Because the thing that made Joe Montana the most clutch quarterback in the history of professional football, the thing that coaches and teammates and opponents have been trying to describe for 40 years, is not in any of those numbers. It is in what he did not do. He did not panic. Not once. Not when the clock was running out. Not when the defense had his number. Not when the game, by any reasonable calculation, was already lost. In the moments when everyone else on the field was feeling what the moment required them to feel, the pressure, the weight, the biological truth of high-stakes competition, Joe Montana simply was not there. He went somewhere else, and from that somewhere else, he made throws that changed the history of the sport. Have you ever been around someone who was completely calm in circumstances that were objectively terrifying and found yourself wondering, quietly, whether the calm was actually composure or whether it was something else entirely? Whether the absence of visible fear was a skill or a wound? That question has been asked about Joe Montana for 50 years, and the answer, when you follow the story all the way to where it actually leads, is more complicated and more human than the highlight reel has ever suggested. It is January 10th, 1982, Candlestick Park, San Francisco. The NFC Championship game. The Dallas Cowboys, America's team, the most dominant franchise in professional football over the previous decade, are leading the San Francisco 49ers 6-0 in the fourth quarter. The 49ers have the ball on their own 11-yard line. There are less than 5 minutes remaining. Any objective reading of the situation says the Cowboys are going to the Super Bowl. Joe Montana comes to the line of scrimmage. He is 25 years old. He is in his 3rd year as a starter. He is playing in his first NFC Championship game. He is trailing by 6 points with less than 5 minutes to play, starting a drive from his own 11. He is also, according to everyone who was near him in that huddle, completely calm. Not performing calm. Calm. The teammates who have described that huddle across the decades describe the same thing. A quality of steadiness that was not about words or leadership speeches, but about physics, the way a person's nervous system can become a regulating force for everyone around it. He drove the length of the field. With 58 seconds remaining, he threw a 6-yard touchdown pass to Dwight Clark, a throw so improbable, so improvised, so precisely placed in the only window that existed, that it has been called the catch, and has been studied and celebrated and argued about in the decades since. The 49ers won. They went on to win Super Bowl XV. Joe Montana was named the game's most valuable player, and this story does not begin in Candlestick Park. It begins in Monongahela, Pennsylvania, in a town where the steel mills were still running and where a father's certainty about his son's future was the most structuring force in a childhood that had no other obvious trajectory. Pull back far enough from the 4 Super Bowl rings and the Hall of Fame and the name that became synonymous with a specific kind of grace under pressure, and you find the beginning. Not the compressed mythology of the natural-born winner, the actual beginning, with its specific texture of pressure and formation and the particular cost of a childhood organized entirely around someone else's vision of what you were supposed to become. Joseph Clifford Montana Jr. was born on June 11, 1956, in New Eagle, Pennsylvania, a small town in Washington County coal and steel country, the industrial American working class, the world of men who worked with their bodies and who understood their sons' futures in terms of the physical gifts those sons had been given and what those gifts could produce. His father, Joe Montana Sr., was a man of intense conviction about his son. The conviction was not modest. From the time Joe Jr. showed any athletic ability, the father organized his life around the development of it. He built a makeshift gymnasium in their home. He arranged games and practices and competitions. He coached and trained and pushed in the specific way that fathers who believe they are building something great push with love so thoroughly mixed with ambition that separating them becomes impossible. Joe Jr. was, by every measure available, actually gifted. Not mythologized after the fact, genuinely, observably gifted in the way that makes the people around a young athlete stop and look at each other. He could throw a football with a precision and a touch that the other kids around him could not replicate. His spatial awareness was exceptional. His ability to read a defense and respond before it fully developed was, at 12 and 13 and 14 years old, already something different from what coaches typically encountered. The pressure that came with the gift was constant and early. He was not allowed to have a childhood that was not organized around athletics. He was not permitted to have a bad game, or a bad season, or a period of doubt about whether this was the path. The father's conviction did not leave room for the son's uncertainty. And the son who loved his father, who wanted to please his father, who understood the love beneath the pressure even when the pressure was difficult, absorbed the expectation and built himself around it. He went to Notre Dame in 1974. He was recruited as one of the most coveted high school quarterbacks in the country. He arrived as a freshman expecting the path that his father's certainty had pointed toward. And then, almost immediately, the path became something else. Have you ever had the certainty of someone who loved you turn out to be more about their need than your readiness? Have you ever arrived at the destination someone else's belief had pointed you toward and found that the destination was not what the belief had prepared you for? That question is the hidden beginning of Joe Montana's story. Not the Super Bowls. The 4 years in South Bend that tested everything his father had built and revealed something about the man underneath the quarterback that the highlight reels never fully show. Notre Dame in 1974 was one of the most pressure-saturated football environments in American college sports. Ara Parseghian was the coach. The program expected and produced champions. The expectations for highly recruited quarterbacks were not measured against progress or development. They were measured against results. Immediately, Joe Montana did not start immediately. He did not even play regularly in his freshman year. He was the seventh-string quarterback at various points in his early career at Notre Dame, a fact that is now presented, in the mythology, as evidence of his eventual triumph. At the time, it was simply the experience of a young man who had been told his entire life that he was exceptional, finding himself at the back of a depth chart at the one institution that was supposed to confirm everything his father had been building toward. He thought about leaving. He has said this directly. He nearly transferred more than once. The gap between what his father's conviction had promised and what the reality of Notre Dame was delivering was wide enough that quitting felt, at various points, like a rational choice rather than a failure of character. He stayed. He played through a coaching change. Dan Devine took over from Parseghian in 1975 and through the specific instability of a program navigating the transition between coaches and systems and the particular difficulty of a quarterback who was genuinely talented but who the new staff had not recruited and therefore had no particular investment in developing. He had moments of brilliance that the coaches noticed and periods of inconsistency that landed him back on the bench. He was developing not in a straight line but in the uneven, frequently discouraging way that genuine development actually happens when the conditions are not designed to produce it. His senior year was the culmination not just of Notre Dame, but of everything his father had built. The Cotton Bowl, January 1st, 1979. Notre Dame versus Houston, one of the most remarkable games in college football history. The Fighting Irish were trailing 23-3 at halftime, in ice storm conditions, an actual ice storm, in Dallas in January, in a stadium with no heat and a field that was barely playable. Players on both sides were hypothermic, Some needed medical attention at halftime. The conditions were objectively unsurvivable as a football game. The score in those conditions made the outcome look sealed. Joe Montana came out in the second half. He threw for 3 touchdowns and led Notre Dame to a 35-34 comeback victory. In the final seconds, in a game that had been functionally over at halftime, in weather conditions that would have been an acceptable excuse for any quarterback in the country to be less than himself, he was not less than himself. He was not panicking. He was not performing calm for the cameras. He was, by every account of everyone in that stadium, simply present, organizing the huddle, reading the defense, making throws that had no business landing where they landed, in conditions that should have made all of it impossible. Notre Dame won the national championship that season. Joe Montana was drafted in the 3rd round by the San Francisco 49ers in 1979. In the 3rd round. Not the 1st. Not the 2nd. The scouts had seen everything at Notre Dame, had seen the Cotton Bowl, and had still not fully processed what they were looking at. The arm was not elite by NFL standards. The athleticism was not exceptional by NFL standards. What he had was not legible to the standard instruments of evaluation. Bill Walsh, however, was not using standard instruments. There is a version of Joe Montana's story that the NFL Films version of football history has always preferred. The genius. The Iceman. The quarterback who never lost a Super Bowl, who never threw an interception at a critical moment without recovering from it, who operated under the highest possible pressure with a consistency that was simply not available to other human beings. That version is accurate as far as it goes. What it leaves out is the version about what the calm was made of and what the calm was protecting. Bill Walsh had taken over the San Francisco 49ers in 1979. He was one of the most innovative offensive minds in the history of the game, the architect of the West Coast offense. The system that used short, precise passes as the primary vehicle for moving the ball, that treated the quarterback's intelligence and decision-making as more important than his physical tools. Walsh needed a specific kind of quarterback. Not the biggest arm. Not the most athletic. The most accurate reader. The most reliable decision-maker. The player who would execute the system's precision and timing without variation or emotional interference. He found that in Joe Montana, or rather, he found it in Joe Montana after a process of careful and patient development that the mythology tends to compress into inevitability. Montana did not start his first season with San Francisco. He was developed carefully by Walsh given situations that tested the system without requiring it to be perfect, given the room to make mistakes in contexts where mistakes were survivable, given the specific confidence that a coach who truly understood the talent could provide. When he started, the precision was already there. Walsh had not created it. He had created the conditions in which it could finally be fully deployed. The 4 Super Bowl championships that followed XY after the 1981 season, 6 after 1984, XI after 1988, XIV after 1989, were not identical experiences of the same dominant franchise rolling over weaker opponents. They were 4 genuinely difficult championships, each involving significant competition, each requiring something from Joe Montana that was specific to that game and that moment. Super Bowl XC, January 22, 1989 was the one that produced the moment most cited as evidence of the calm. The 49ers were trailing the Cincinnati Bengals 16-13 with 3 minutes and 10 seconds remaining in the fourth quarter. They had the ball on their own 8-yard line. Joe Montana came to the huddle. He looked up into the stands. He spotted John Candy, the comedian, sitting near the tunnel. He pointed John Candy out to his teammates. In the huddle, with 3 minutes remaining, trailing by 3, starting a drive from their own 8-yard line in the Super Bowl. Whether the John Candy moment was genuine or performed, whether it was an authentic expression of his relationship with pressure or a skilled de-escalation technique he had learned, is the question that has never been fully answered. His teammates have confirmed it happened. What it meant, what was happening inside the man who did it remains, by his own careful management of the story, somewhat private. What happened after it is documented completely. He drove 92 yards. He threw the game-winning touchdown with 34 seconds remaining. The 49ers won their third Super Bowl. Have you ever watched someone do something in a high-stakes moment that was so unexpected and so correct that you couldn't tell whether they were the most composed person in the room or whether they were operating by rules that the room simply didn't have access to? That is the question Joe Montana's calm has always asked. And the answer, which he has never given directly, is probably both. The biggest crisis in Joe Montana's professional life was not a Super Bowl. It was a recovery, the specific, private, consuming experience of a body that had been treated as an instrument of professional competition for 15 years, presenting, finally, a bill that could not be deferred. In August 1991, during an exhibition game against the Giants, Joe Montana suffered a torn tendon in his throwing elbow. He was 35 years old. He had not missed significant time to injury in his career to that point. He had been, by the standards of his position and his era, durable. The elbow required surgery. The surgery required recovery. The recovery required months. And then the months extended, and the recovery required a year, and the year became 2 years. And across those 2 years, Joe Montana did not play a single regular season or playoff game for the San Francisco 49ers. Steve Young, who had been Montana's backup, took over as the starter. He played well. He played very well. The 49ers continued to win. The question that hung over the franchise for 2 years, the question that the press raised and that Montana's absence kept alive, was whether the team was moving on from the greatest quarterback in the history of the franchise. He returned in 1992. He played well enough. He was not quite the version of himself that had won 4 Super Bowls. The injuries had been real, the recovery had been genuinely difficult, and the body at 36 was not the body at 30. He was traded to the Kansas City Chiefs in 1993. He was 36 years old, coming off 2 years of injury absence, going to a franchise that had never won a Super Bowl and had not been a championship contender in years. He took them to the AFC Championship game. They lost to the Buffalo Bills. It was his last game. He has spoken about the years in Kansas City with a combination of genuine satisfaction and honest acknowledgement of what did not happen. He went there to win a Super Bowl. He did not win a Super Bowl. He brought a franchise to the verge of its first championship appearance and fell 1 game short. The NFL will not give that Super Bowl back to him. He has made his peace with it in the specific way of people who understand that some things you want very much simply do not happen, and that the wanting and the not getting do not diminish the trying. He retired in 1994. The central irony of Joe Montana's career is precise and quietly devastating. The most composed quarterback in the history of the game, the man who was never visibly rattled, who never appeared to experience the game's pressure, as his teammates and opponents experienced it, spent his entire career managing a relationship with pressure that was, by his own careful accounts, not the absence of feeling, but the management of it. The calm was not the absence of the game's weight. It was the practice, developed from childhood, of not letting the weight show. The lesson his father taught him, that the pressure was real and that the response to it was everything, was the lesson that made him the greatest clutch performer in the history of professional football. It was also, by his own account, the lesson that followed him out of the game and into the private hours. In 2026, Joe Montana is 69 years old. He lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, where much of the career's greatest work happened, with his wife Jennifer, whom he married in 1985, and to whom he has been married for 41 years. They have 4 children. The family is, by every available account, intact in the way that the careers of professional athletes sometimes permit and sometimes do not intact, because the people in it chose each other and continued choosing each other across the disruptions that a career of that scale produces. He is, in 2026, a presence in the business world venture capital technology investments. The specific second career of a famous former athlete who has both the capital and the access to operate in spaces that were not available to the players of his era. He invests with the same precision he used to survey defenses, looking for the opening that others haven't seen, making the decision before the window closes. He advises, he shows up to the rooms that invite him, and operates in them with the same quality of calm presence that his teammates described in those championship huddles decades ago. He speaks about football with the perspective of a man who has been away from it long enough to see it whole. He speaks about Bill Walsh, who died in 2007, with the specific warmth and specific acknowledgement of someone who understood, eventually, what the coach had given him, and what it had cost Walsh to give it. He speaks about the Super Bowls not as trophies, but as experiences, specific, detailed, human experiences, full of the things that happened in the room that the television broadcast never captured. He does not speak at any length about the calm. Not because he is hiding it, because it has never been something he fully had language for. The calm was not a technique he learned. It was a formation, something that happened to him in Monongahela, in the pressure-saturated childhood his father built, in the Notre Dame years that tested everything, in the West Coast offense that Bill Walsh designed around the specific quality of his decision-making. It was the product of all of those things, and it served him completely, and it made him the greatest clutch performer the sport has produced. Whether it served him equally well in the life behind the game is a question he has not answered directly. He has 4 Super Bowl rings. He has a marriage of 41 years. He has 4 children. He has the respect of everyone who ever watched him play or played alongside him. He also has, by his own careful and infrequent admissions, a relationship with pressure that did not end when the career ended, that has simply found new rooms to operate in, new stakes to calibrate against, new moments that ask for the same thing the game always asks for. The calm is still there. What it is made of is still, after 69 years, his own. Joe Montana's story is not a story about football. It is not a story about 4 Super Bowl championships or the quarterback rating or the catch or the John Candy moment or any of the other coordinates that the NFL Films version of his life has assembled into a mythology of a man who was simply better than everyone else at the thing that mattered most. It is a story about what composure costs when it is built from pressure rather than from peace. About the specific formation of a human being whose relationship with high stakes was shaped from the earliest age by a father's absolute certainty about what that human being was supposed to become. About what it means to spend a lifetime being the calm at the center of the storm, and about the private question that the calm has always been sitting on top of. We celebrate the composure. We watch the fourth quarter drives and the championship moments and the precision of execution under conditions that unmade every other quarterback of his era, and we call it greatness, which it is. But greatness built from pressure has a specific cost that the highlight reel is not designed to show. And the man who built his greatness that way has, in the years since the game ended, been living with that cost in the private hours that the camera has never had access to. What does it take to maintain your composure in the situations that matter most? And what does it cost, not in the moment, but over 50 years of the practice of it, to be the person who never lets the weight show? Leave that in the comments. Because that is not a question about football. It is a question about the price of the kind of strength that other people depend on. And it is a question that deserves a more honest answer than the highlight reel ever gives it. If this story moved something in, you leave a like. It costs nothing. It means this story reaches someone who needs it. Subscribe. More stories like this are coming, lives that looked composed from the outside and were something more complicated from within. And tell me in the comments, what is the one thing from Joe Montana's story that you carry forward? Because the most important throw he ever made was not the one that won the Super Bowl. It was every throw he made in the huddle in Monongahela, in his father's backyard, when nobody was watching and everything was being built. That is where the calm came from. And that is where every great thing you will build will also come from. We'll be back.